Assalamu alaikum. May the divine peace and blessings be with you. Welcome to my podcast, Hidden Jewels of the Qur'an. Reflections on the Holy Book based on our common inner experiences, integrating spirituality with psychology, science, philosophy, and ethics. Allah has given us the ability to find meanings in forms, and Allah gifted us with sensations, feelings, rationality, intuition, and imagination to enable us to know the hidden jewels within ourselves and to enable us to discover the hidden jewels of life. In this episode, we are going to reflect on time. What is time? Is it a dimension, a container, a mental perception, or an illusion? Does time have a beginning and an end, or is it eternal? Is it linear or cyclic? Does time flow, and if so, can it flow backwards so we can travel to the past? Or can it flow forward so we can predict the future? These questions have been puzzling philosophers for many centuries. Aristotle, the prominent Greek philosopher, argued that time is the measure of a change, but it is not a change itself. He argued that time could not have a beginning and cannot have an end, because one cannot count a moment without locating it between an earlier moment and a later moment to itself. He concluded that time is not atomistic, but is continuous. This entails that the world is eternal. Contrary to this view, Plato, another prominent Greek philosopher, suggested that time is like an empty, independent container of things and events. This means that time exists independently beyond the world, thus allowing a metaphysical dimension to exist. This view has been developed later by some philosophers and creationists who suggested that the world was created in time and its time will end, for only the transcendent God is eternal. Many Jewish, Christians, and Muslim thinkers claimed that time is linear. It has a beginning and it will have an end. For example, Al-Ghazali asserted that the world was created in time, suggesting time to be real and not a mental perception, and that it exists independent from the world, just as Plato. However, Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in the West, argued that time exists only in the mind due to memory and expectations. He agreed with Aristotle regarding the eternity of the world and that time related to our perception of motion and change. However, when Ibn Sina suggested that the world is eternal, he does not equate the world to God, because the very existence of the world depending on God, on Allah. And because Allah is the creator, He does not cease to be so, which means He continuously creates. That demands that there is an eternal world. So when this world we know come to an end, for example, instantly a new world will be created. So this means that the world is eternal. And that is suggested in the Qur'an as Allah speaks of Al-Akhirah, the final world or the final abode, which according to some hadith Qudsi, it's a continuous creation, like Allah will create things instantly in that world. St. Augustine, a prominent Christian philosopher, argued that humans understand time through memory, attention, and expectation. Or in other words, time is just a mental perception of past, present, and future, relating things to one another. So according to him, God lives in a different world where time does not exist. So he agrees with Ibn Sina that time is a mental perception, and he agrees also with all Jewish, Christian, Muslim thinkers that God transcends time. So the question is, does our mental perception of time transcend the world? This view influenced Thomas Aquinas, who argued in the second way of his 5 ways to prove God's existence that since the world appears as a sequence of events, and because every event in the world must have a cause, then there must be a cause for the entire sequence of events that exists outside time. Thus, to him, time is a sequence of events that causes each other related to the creation. Nasruddin Khusru, an Ismaili thinker, agrees that the world comes after its creator in rank, but without there be any time in between. He argues that time came to existence by the existence of the world, just as space was created with the world's creation. And so it is absurd to ask why God created the universe in a specific time, for to God time does not exist. Thus, to Khusru, time is a temporary existence related to the creation. Thinkers of other religions such as the Babylonian, the Mayan, and the Hopi claim that time is cyclic, which means it goes on like a wheel of different eras. The Hindu sacred text, the Vedas, asserts that the universe goes through repeated cycles of destruction and rebirth, with each cycle lasting 4,320 million years. The Muslim Ismaili thinkers had a similar concept of time, suggesting it to be a progression of cycles, where each cycle has a beginning and an end. For example, Tusi wrote of 7 smaller cosmic cycles, where each cycle consists of 7,000 years, and by the end of the 7th cycle, that is after 49,000 years, a new era starts. You know how in science they speaks of the different eras of Earth, or the different eras or stages of the universe, where something appears completely new and very different from the previous era. And so we can see how that description of time is true. There is something that starts and ends, and some new thing emerges that has almost no resemblance to the past era in its outer appearance. The 13th century philosophers Henry and Callis of Rome said time exists as a mind-independent continuum, but is distinguished into earlier and later parts only by the mind. But Duns Scotus acknowledged that the existence of both physical and physiological time exists. And then we have the Greek Antiphon, the sophist, in a fragment preserved from his chief work on truth, saying time is not a reality hypothesis, but a concept or a measure. Parmenides took the idea further and proposed that time is an illusion. A similar concept is held by some Buddhist mystics, who declared that during the state of nirvana, time comes to a stop. For time is an illusion perceived in relation to the changing material world. Mirdamad came with an explanation of time that integrates all the described concepts of time by different scholars. He integrated all of these principles in a very comprehensive and logical explanation of time. He suggested that there are three ontological levels of time: the temporal, the atemporal, and the everlasting. The temporal in Arabic language is called waqt and can be found in Surah 15, Ayah 38. The atemporal time is dahr in Arabic language, and it means aeons, and can be found in Surah 76, Ayah 1. And the everlasting time, or sarmad in Arabic language, can be found in Surah 28, ayat 71 and 72. So to Mirdamad, sarmad is the eternal realm of the perpetual divine existence, while dahr, the eons, the long eons, or the everlasting eons, is what contains the incorporeal, intelligible, or the immutable prototypes, fixed entities. That means the spirits. He refers to the spirits as an existence in eons. Their very existence depends on Allah. So Allah is beyond time, but they are in time that is long time or eternal and everlasting. And the man is the lowest level of time in which the physical existence is present and is subject to generation and corruption. Mirdamad further elaborates on how each lower realm of time is subject to the superiority of the higher realm in that hierarchy. This means that every temporal existence, that is physical existence, which is subject to generation and corruption, is based upon its non-being in the higher realm of time. To explain this subtle concept, you could say before an invention comes to the physical realm, it exists in the realm of imagination in a subtle way, in a spiritual way. So the physical invention itself is non-existence in the realm of imagination. And so the temporal existence that is subject to corruption and generation, which is the physical existence, is non-being in the higher realm of time, which is the subtle realm of the spirits. Spirits, abstracts, meanings, concepts, and so forth. While this realm is called the dahr because it's eons. We can travel, for example, to the past and to the future through the realm of imagination. Mentally, we can remember things from the past and relive that way in a mental way. We can also foresee things from the future or predict things or imagine things before they happen by receiving inspirations from Allah. In that way, that realm is not subject to these limits that exists in the physical realm. So, for example, we can travel eons and see how the universe began. We can travel to the future again and see how things could be and foresee things. So, Dahr again is not very related to the physical realm, and it is from which the physical realm emerges. And the physical realm is non-being in that higher realm of time. Similarly, the prototypes are non-being in the perpetual divine essence. That means that the spiritual realm or the spirits are non-being in the divine essence. The divine essence is completely singular and transcends the world, and so it is timeless, and time cannot be related to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but can be related to both the spirits as existing eons after eons everlastingly, and time can also be related to our momentary consciousness of the physical world. So according to Mirdamad, Sarmad denotes the relation of the permanent to the permanent, and Dahr, or the atemporal, is the relation between the permanent to the changeable, while Zaman, or sometimes called Waqt, temporary time, or temporal time, is the relation of the changeable to the changeable. Thus, Mirdamad describes for us our perception of time and its nature. Suppose the temporal existence, which is called contingent existence or accidental existence, huduth, and the pre-eternal existence, which is called qidam, has three kinds according to Mirdamad: the dhati, the essential; the dahri, the temporal; and the zamani, or the waqti, which is temporal. This means that the world can be considered both temporal in its physical sense and pre-eternal in its spiritual sense, and eternal in the way that it will continue to exist by the will of Allah in His knowledge, eternally existing. From the perspective of the man, or the temporal time, to Dahr, to Sarmad, again from the perspective of temporal time to the atemporal time to the eternal time, the world was essentially non-being and came into existence from ex nihilo. But from the perspective of descending order, from the eternity to the atemporal to the temporal, the world is very eternally and momentarily becoming, continuously becoming. It's in flux, coming from the essence of Allah to the spiritual realm to the physical realm. For example, again, an invention coming from the knowledge of Allah, which is eternal, to the spiritual realm, that is the mental inner realm of a human mind, and then coming into the physical existence. In other words, the world is in continuous unfolding from the essential divine transcendent dimension into a meta period or continuous time of unfolding, and then into existence in the temporal time we perceive in the physical world. This means that in the realm of divine presence, Sarmad, the divine attributes which are eternal or timeless and transcendent are continuously expressing themselves through immutable archetypes that everlastingly embodying the expressions of the divine attributes. By the light of existence, these immutable archetypes generate particularized or individualized temporal formation in time in the physical realm that is subject to generation and corruption. To explain that a little more, we can see that Allah has knowledge of you and me and everything. Even though we are in continuous flux, we exist eternally in a constant way in Allah's knowledge, and Allah knows what we experience before we experience it, and after we experience it, and as we experience it, because He's beyond time. So Dahr and Zaman can be considered different frames of reference through which different observers can have different perceptions of whether a given pair of events happened at the same time or at different times. It is as Einstein's special relativity theory states. But like Ibn Arabi suggested, Dahr is a spiritual realm in which mental, intelligible events take place, while Zaman is an outer realm of events, a temporal realm of events. In conclusion, as we see, Mir Zamad's ontological concept of time is an inclusive and comprehensive view that shows the different aspects and perceptions of time. When we come back, we are going to discuss how existential experiences and scientific experiments assert Mir Damad ontological concept of time. You are listening to the hidden jewels of the Holy Qur'an, and we are talking about time and how existential experience and scientific experiments can prove the ontological concept of time that Mir Damad proposed. Existential experience shows that the human being is in continuous change, in flux, physically, emotionally, intellectually, and so forth. Yet, the human being consciousness or awareness of his own soul as a whole being continues to be the same. It is not changeable. The 2-year-old feels the self or is aware of his self or herself just as the 70 years old, which proves that consciousness of the self or the awareness, or maybe accurately we can say the soul or the essence of being, is immutable and immortal, for it is not related to the changing that is taking place in the temporal time, in the physical world. our consciousness is also aware at the same time of the changes that mark the temporal time as we grow and age and observe the changing events. So we see the generation and the corruption of the physical world. We see our body and we see the changes that happen through it. We also observe events and have momentarily experiences. This means we are experiencing both the transcendent time, the atemporal time, which is our awareness of ourselves, and then the temporal time, which are two levels of consciousness. We can also become aware in our sleep or in our imagination or in our spiritual experiences. We can perceive memories from the past or foresee things in the future. We can see people who passed away. We see their essence as a whole. We can also travel to past and future or from place to place during sleep and spiritual experiences and so forth within a blinking of an eye. That's another level of time, that is the dahr, the atemporal, that can fold the waqt, the momentarily perception of time is folded into it and it becomes non-being. For example, if you are enjoying something you're doing or you're happy, time seems to fly fast. That is the theory of relativity of Einstein. If you are in pain or if you are suffering emotionally or so forth or are bored, then time seems to dilate and be too long. Your perception of time is relative to your inner state. And again, during sleep, you can travel to very far away place, or you can see people who died maybe hundreds of years ago. So this dahr or aeons, distance and temporal time is folded and becomes non-being into it. So this is a proof that we have two perceptions of time. The temporal time related to the physical events and physical forms that are subject to generation and corruption. And we also have a perception of a temporal time that is not attached to the physical. In a recent scientific experiment, laser beams was made to pass through a chamber containing cold cesium atoms. The end result was a beam of light that moved at 300 times the theoretical limit of the speed of light. The beam appeared 60 feet on the other side of the chamber before the main part entering the chamber. In other words, the future was seen before it happened. It was Einstein who said that nothing can travel faster than light, and that prevents traveling to the past and predicting the future, and it also entails that effects occur after their causes. But Dr. Wang, one of the NEC scientists who conducted the experiments, stated, this result does not threaten Einstein's theories, in particular the causality principle, which states that a cause must precede its effect. He explained that what was perceived in the experiment was knowledge of the effect of the passing laser beam and not the laser beam itself, which is the effect. In other words, what was perceived was knowledge of the future, but not the future itself. This scientific experiment and its result show Mir-Damad's ontology of time to be true. The dahri, or the atemporal aspect, can give us knowledge, but the temporal aspect shows the actual physical aspect of it. This is distinguished from the temporal time, where the actual being becomes into physical existence on the other side of the chamber. The chamber here can be understood as the intermediate realm, or the barzakh in Arabic language. I like to end this talk by mentioning an analogy given by Rumi to explain the nature of matter and how the temporal space-time realm comes into being with motion. Rumi asked us to imagine a stick with a singular, fixed, intensely bright light on its tip, and that it is spinning at high speed, very high speed. In such case, we will perceive the one point of light as a circle of light that can blind us, so we can't perceive the bright point of light or the stick itself. To be able to perceive the reality of time and existence explained by Mir-Damad, one needs to transcend the temporal realm to the atemporal realm of spiritual entities or subtle bodies, sometimes called the imaginal realm, and finally ascend to the sarmad, or the eternal realm, to witness the singular divinity and its perpetual existence. In other words, what Rumi says is, because things are in motion, they blind us from seeing that which is eternal and everlasting, and that is more subtle and needs our higher level of awareness and perception of time. Thank you for listening. Please join me again in another episode of Hidden Jewels of the Holy Qur'an.